Coming up, I'll be speaking with Peter Rachleff, labor historian and co-founder of the Eastside Freedom Library. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. With me this week is labor historian Peter Rachleff. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, John.
Now, you are co-founder of the Eastside Freedom Library, and we'll be getting to that in a minute. But tell us who you are and how you got to our lovely city. Were you born here?
No. Okay. I'm a refugee from New England. I came here in 1982 to take a job in the history department at Macalester College, which I've just recently left. And I was hired to connect the department with local institutions and organizations to create internships for students, to do Minnesota history, and to come at it, as people knew at the time, from a labor and immigrant lens. And that's an angle that I've continued to pursue. And along all those years, I built a set of relationships with historical organizations, community organizations, labor unions, ethnic organizations, and now I'm interested in energizing those relationships for this new project.
Now, this show is not supposed to be a plug show because it is public television, but we do, promote and show a lot of things about, the public good, including the Eastside Freedom Library, which we'll get to. But I want to hear more about labor history because it's not taught, is it?
No.
I mean, you taught it,
right,
but it's not taught in the public schools.
No, it's not on the test.
How essential is it to, like, say, our standard of living?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think how can we understand where we're going if we don't understand where we've been? And not to be critical of something in the mainstream, but if you take Ken Burns's recent 14-hour treatment on the Roosevelt family, you would get a sense that most of what happened in the 20th century in the United States was due to a handful of very rich, very well-connected people, when in fact most of the decisions that they made, most of the reforms that they implemented were in response to massive grassroots movements of women for the right to vote, of people for international justice and fairness, of workers for better wages and benefits and the right to be represented in the workplace. So labor history is part of redirecting our focus away from the handful of famous, well-bred people and more to looking at people who are more like us, who have faced challenges, like the challenges that we faced, how to live a secure and meaningful life. And labor history can give us guidance from what was done in the past and can also help us unpack the present and understand how the rules came to be the rules, what the expectations really are, and what the possibilities for change might be.
That's a great litany, how the rules became the rules, what the expectations are. That's stuff you need to know in your work life and in your human life.
Right. I mean, and I think I like to even play with the notion of democracy. What does it mean when we say that we live in a democracy? I just gave a talk through the St. Paul Public Schools Adult and Community Ed that we really need to think about democracy as not just voting, but economic democracy. How much voice do we have in the places where we work? Social democracy. What benefits does the government provide to all citizens and all residents, whether it's affordable care, whether it's access to education, whether it's decent roads? What is that social democracy that we live in? And cultural democracy. Don't we have a right when we look at television, when we read the newspapers, when our kids go to school, don't we have a right to hear the stories and see the faces of people who look like us, who have come from backgrounds like ours, rather than studying just the handful of people like the Kennedys or the Roosevelts? So we need to have political, economic, social, and cultural democracy in order to be in a meaningful democracy.
Now, I'm wondering how far back does labor history really go? Because Paul Krugman talks all the time about the Middle Ages as being a time of essentially repressed demand, that there were the lords in the manor, and everybody else, no matter what you did, you were just going to eat grain enough to survive. And the middle class didn't really start to evolve until people asserted their rights. They weren't granted from above. Is that how far back
Sure.
you start your courses?
Sure. Well, not necessarily my courses, but I think that my thinking about particularly the evolution of work. How did work go from being something that people did, A, when they felt like it, B, as a means of self-expression, C, as a way to interact with other people, to becoming something that's simply about earning a paycheck? How did that transformation take place? And if the quest for meaning in life is such a difficult struggle, what happened to the possibilities of finding meaning in our work? And I think that we tend to have a very presentist bias in the West, that we think that life is always getting better, that we've always been on this linear path. And so therefore work must be better today than it was. And in fact, there's a lot to learn from the kind of work that people did. I'm thinking of one of my great teachers, E.P. Thompson, the British historian. His first book was about William Morris. And William Morris was a guy who was an upholsterer and an architect, and someone who really valued earlier aesthetics about how people could organize comfort and meaning in their material world around them. And it turned him into a socialist in the late 19th century when he saw what rampant industrial capitalism was doing to people's everyday lives.
Now, this is a great preface for what we're going to talk about in the Eastside Freedom Library. And I want to kind of get at the actual history of the building and stuff, but maybe we should just describe what it is, where it is now.
Sure. So it's a gorgeous building. It's a 1916 Beaux-Arts style building, one of 85 Carnegie libraries that were built in the state of Minnesota, almost 900 built around the country. Andrew Carnegie became America's wealthiest man in the first decade of the 20th century, largely because he employed hundreds of thousands of immigrants doing dangerous, difficult labor at long hours and low wages. They made him really rich. At some point towards the end of his life, he became a philanthropist and started to give that money away. And somewhere in all of that, he got this idea that libraries could be the building blocks of what he called a republic of letters. I came to Carnegie through the field of labor history, which I first studied seriously at the University of Pittsburgh, which was sort of in Carnegie's domain. Yeah. And I heard stories like people said, you knew you were going to get a Carnegie library after he broke a strike in your town, some people said. Other people said Carnegie gave these libraries and none of his workers were ever able to go to them because he made them work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there are ironies and paradoxes in all of this. But on the east side of St. Paul, which has been an immigrant working class neighborhood for a century and a half, first the Swedes and Norwegians, the Irish and the Germans, then African Americans coming from the south, then Eastern Europeans, Italians, Poles, one wave after another, and now this enormous influx of people from Central America, Mexicans and Salvadorans, and Mexicans from various parts of Mexico, Somalis, Hmong, Karen people from Burma, now the so-called Bhutanese people who are actually Nepalese but have come from the country of Bhutan. This has always been a place where immigrants have come in St. Paul, have come in the Twin Cities, and they've come because they were looking for work. And so whether they worked building the railroads in the 19th century or servicing the railroads in the late 19th and early 20th, or working in manufacturing in garment and shoes and cigars in downtown St. Paul, or whether they became the workers at 3M and Whirlpool and Ham's Brewery in the middle of the 20th century, or now if they're the people who clean the big box stores and provide home health care services and work in nursing homes, these are people who came here because there was a demand for their labor. And that's what the East Side has been. This building has been a building block of a potential republic of letters, a place for people to gain education, through that education gain access to all those levels of democracy, to demand that their stories be told, not just that they earn a decent living, but that they get respect for their cultures and for their lives. It's been probably the only building on the east side of St. Paul that every immigrant group, every cultural group has had a positive relationship with. They have their own churches, they have their own ethnic organizations. This has been the one place that everybody has come to. And they all have warm and fuzzy feelings about it. It's great.
It's a real anchor of the community.
Absolutely.
Now, tell me about the history of the building, because it was a functioning part of the library system.
Right, right. So what we don't know, there are two huge questions we don't know that I intend early on in our running this building to begin to address. How did they come to get the dough to build this building on the east side of St. Paul? Who applied for it? I've become very sensitive now to the nature of writing grants, because I'm writing a lot of grants. Who wrote the grant? Who asked for it? Was it ministers? Was it politicians? Was it trade union leaders? Who were the people in 1914, 1915 who applied to the Carnegie Foundation and said, we'd like to have a library here? We don't know the answer to that question, but we will find out. And then secondly, who built the building? Who were the carpenters? Who were the brick masons? Who were the electricians? Who were all the people that did the work to build what is really a beautiful building? Who did that? Were they people who lived in the neighborhood? Were they themselves immigrants or the children of immigrants? We now know, because of the work that was done 2 and 3 years ago by a great group of largely self-taught labor historians, Randy Croce, who works at the Labor Ed Service at the U, Dave Reilly, who was a railroad engineer, Dan Ganley, who was a printing room pressman, John Seeloff, who was a carpenter. They did all this research on who built our state capitol. And they made a fantastic documentary film called Who Built Our Capitol, and a great website full of information. I want that for this building. I want people on the east side to know who asked to have the building there and who made it possible and who built it. And we're going to get answers to those questions. And I think people will understand the building differently when it's kind of been deconstructed that way.
Now, this is a building that is kind of built like a tank. It should
Yes.
last for hundreds of years.
Yes,
It's
yes.
going to take some maintenance to bring it back up to code.
Right.
But
Right.
it was a functioning part of the library system.
Right.
When did it stop? Why did it stop?
Why did it stop? So there were 3 Carnegie libraries in St. Paul. There's one on the west side, the Riverview branch. There's one in St. Anthony, the St. Anthony branch, and there's this one. And it's been part of the functioning library system since 1917. 5, 6 years ago, a number of political and urban promoting figures in St. Paul got the idea that there should be a new library on the east side, that this new library should be on a new model. It should merge the functions of a recreational center and a library, and it could have a community center all as part of it. And that it should have the latest technology. There should be workshops for kids to learn how to make movies, learn how to move into a field like this. And so they began to raise the dough for that. Ultimately, they raised and spent $14 million to build this new building that does all of these functions, which sits at the corner of Payne and Maryland. This summer, they've been widening Maryland Avenue, so that whole intersection is being kind of reconstructed. We're 3 blocks away from there. And in May of this year, they moved into the new building and vacated this building. My partner, Beth Cleary, and I, who had formed a 501c3, in order to have a space like this. We didn't know that we would be able to get this space, but we were looking for a space to do the kind of educational and cultural work that we want to do in our neighborhood. We live on the east side. We began to negotiate with the city to gain access to this building. It was a very long and difficult process. There weren't a whole lot of other applicants. The building is on the National List of Historic Sites, which means that almost nothing can be done to the exterior that would change it. It's in a neighborhood that has deteriorated significantly right around it, economically and socially. And so the possibility that architects or doctors or lawyers would want to have their offices in that building were kind of scant. And so there was basically us and somebody who had some idea about making a coffee shop. And we would have liked to have purchased the building outright, but the city set a rather high price for that, and we felt that given the amount of money that will have to be raised to, as our architect calls it, restore, renovate, and preserve, that we couldn't afford to carry a mortgage on top of all of that. Mm-hmm. And so we negotiated a deal finally to lease the building at a very, very reasonable rate for 15 years with an option to buy at any point, and all the expenses of restoration, renovation, preservation, and maintenance fall on us.
Okay.
So there we are.
That's a big burden.
It's a big job.
Okay.
It's a very big job.
In case you're just joining us, this is the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. Today I'm speaking with labor historian Peter Rachleff. He's co-founder of the Eastside Freedom Library. So what are your plans?
So we have plans for the building, for the contents of the building, and for the kind of programming that we want to do with those contents in the building. So we need to replace the roof. We are about to begin. We got a STAR grant for half the cost. We did crowdfunding to make the match. We're ready to roll. We've got a contractor. There will be a new roof on the building before Thanksgiving, without a doubt. Then we're doing significant fundraising and grant writing. We need to replace the heating and cooling system. So another part of the story is that 27 years ago, the library was in a significant state of disrepair. And a group of community people got together and developed a proposal to revitalize the building 27 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that included putting in an elevator. And so the building is completely handicapped accessible, and we've had people in wheelchairs and already at some of our programs. It's really great to see how well that works. They changed, they put in a new heating and cooling system, they put in new windows, they put on a new roof. Many of those things are now wearing out and need to be replaced. So we need to do the heating and cooling system. We want to do some very significant renovation in the downstairs of the library. The main floor is to die for. The main floor has these arched Beaux-Arts windows. Mm-hmm. The natural lighting is breathtaking. It is such a beautiful space. 27 years ago, when they put in new light fixtures and shelving, they made some really nice aesthetic choices. It looks beautiful. We need new carpeting, we need new wall paint, but basically the upstairs is good to go. The downstairs is a little bit funky, and we would like to make the downstairs into a flexible space where we could have poetry readings, storytelling, which is going to be an important part of what we want to do, telling and sharing and listening to stories from the neighborhood. We'd like to have it possible for community groups to hold meetings. Meeting space, particularly in this era where library hours have been cut back, meeting space is at a premium. And so we'd like to be able to offer meeting space to community groups, and a number from the Daughters of the American Revolution to a Latino bilingual poetry reading group to 10,000 Things Theater Company to the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company. People are very interested in our space for rehearsals, for meetings. We want to fix that space up. We want to convert what was the break room into a catering quality kitchen, because we think that when people share stories, they ought to share food too. And so we want people to be able to heat up food at least and be able to share it. And then there's a kind of funky office that we would like to really fix up and make it serviceable as a space for artists and teachers and residents. to come and stay for a couple of weeks, have a futon that would fold out into a couch and or a bed, and use it as an office otherwise, and because we would like eventually to do programming that will bring people in. So that's what we want to do to the building.
And when do you hope to open?
I mean, we are already open in that we've become a venue for programs.
Okay.
And we did a celebration of Juneteenth. We did a program around Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech. We did a History of Labor Day program. We had 10,000 Things in to do one performance of Romeo and Juliet. We had an amazing jazz concert, Douglas Ewart and Manqué Ndose and a group of really avant-garde musicians. We're going to be doing more programming like that. We sort of see two things that we need in the short run. We really need to change the carpeting and paint the walls, and we think that it would be foolhardy to move in our books before we've done that, because we just have to move them again.
Yeah.
And we have about 8,000 books, product placement in the Bester Brothers warehouse in South St. Paul, a good union warehouse. All our stuff is there, ready to come in. So we need to do the physical changes, and then we need to get an archivist to catalog the materials and create a database and a finding aid system so that people can find stuff when they come in. And we feel that all of that should happen in one move. Mm-hmm. The books should come, we open the boxes, we put in book plates, we put in electronic finders, we enter the data, it all goes into a program, and then it goes up on the shelves. And so we need to raise the dough to do that.
Is the long-term goal to have all of it internet accessible?
The information about what's there would be, but not, you'd still have to come to the hard copies to actually use the material. And our collections, so there's my library, which is, built out of 35 years of studying labor, immigration, and African American history. It's a pretty great library. And several people have donated collections to us. Sal Salerno has donated a collection of working class poetry and fiction. Paula Rabinowitz is going to donate a collection of feminist fiction and literary criticism. We have this amazing collection of Fred Ho, the Chinese American jazz baritone saxophone player, composer, political activist who passed away less than a year ago. Fred sent us 100 boxes of his materials. They're down there in the Bester Brothers warehouse. And then most recently, my teacher, David Montgomery, who was one of the founders of modern labor history. David passed away 3 years ago at the age of 84, and his widow is now sending me his personal library to include in the Eastside Freedom Library. So we will have these great books. The Hmong Archive, which is now almost 20 years old, created by Marlon Heiss, who used to work at the Minnesota Historical Society with a very interesting board of Hmong scholars and activists, has built this huge archive of story cloths, textiles, musical instruments, tools, newspaper clippings, great variety of material. They will move in with us as well. And we want to create a finding aid system that will work kind of like Amazon. So that, when you look for something on Amazon, it tells you at the bottom of the page, people looking at this book also looked at these. Mm-hmm. And we want to create a system where some young person comes in as interested in, say, African American labor in the 1930s, and they get a bunch of prompts that say, well, have you looked at Chicano labor in the 30s? Have you looked at Italian American labor in the 30s? Here are other resources we have that might give you a border crossing or comparative kind of perspective. So that's going to be the guts of it, the resources. And then it's building programs to use those resources. Okay. History Day mentoring, working with kids, programs with seniors, oral history projects, storytelling projects. Go ahead, John.
We only have about 3 minutes left, so I want to give you a second to think about
Yeah.
anything that you think we should also get into this interview. But I also want to ask, how can people help?
So we have a website, eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. There is a donate button on the website. There's also up-to-date information about our programs and programming that people can come to. We will be participating in Give to the Max Day, and it's another way that people can give. Some people who see this might have materials that they think should come to us. Cool. We're trying to slow down the kind of leaving orphans on the front stoop is not really a great, and people have sort of done that. We'd rather they didn't, but you can find our contact information on the website, and we do want to collect stuff. We also want to be a kind of filter and see things go to the Minnesota Historical Society or go to the Immigration History Research Center at the U or work with the Minnesota Humanities Center. It doesn't all have to be about us. We want to be the neighborhood-friendly institution where people see that they are part of history, that they can participate in the creation of knowledge, that this is not a library that you come to just to absorb knowledge, but it's a library that you can come to help create knowledge through your family documents, through your organizational records, through the stories that you have about your family and your community. We're going to try to help weave that stuff together and create new layers of knowledge that don't exist. So it's taking it in, but it's also creating it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have great stories to tell. And we want to hear them, and we want to create audiences to hear those stories and interact with those stories. And ultimately, it's all about civic engagement. It's all about empowerment. It's all about actually creating a community on the East Side rather than being a fragmented set of communities, to actually have people see each other and see the commonalities in their own experiences. They came here to get away from something bad. They came here to work. They've helped make this society and this culture better. And they can, the more that becomes self-conscious and intentional, the even better it can become.
And as a public space, it's large enough to bring in a large number of people, yet cozy enough that they aren't feel that they're in a stadium, and it's located in a way that most of the people on the East Side can access it pretty easily.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And hopefully we'd love to be a destination institution so that more people will come to the East Side and discover these great new restaurants along Payne Avenue and the great new Arlington Hills Cultural Center that has replaced this library in the public library system. And there's lots of other cool stuff to discover on the East Side, but we can be a destination, a place to start. It's easy to find right off at 35E, the Maryland Avenue exit. Gets you right there. A block east of Payne, 3 blocks south of Maryland.
Okay, and if you would like to learn about it right now, you can go to their URL, which is?
http://eastsidefreedomlibrary.org.
eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. That's all we have time for on this week's St. Paul Forum. I've been speaking with Peter Rachleff, labor historian and co-founder of the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, John.
We'll see you next week on the St. Paul Forum.